Welcome to Dungeon Academics. My name is Thomas and I will be your instructor. A couple of days ago, Wizards of the Coast put up a job listing for Head of Game Design for Dungeons and Dragons. Now, Wizards of the Coast is based in Seattle and I am based in Helsinki, Finland, so I'm not particularly interested in moving countries at the moment. But if I was to apply for that job, which I'll be honest, I would love, how would I pitch myself to be the next head of game designs for Dungeons and Dragons? Well, there's a number of things that I would try to do to sell myself. And the first thing that I would do is I would appeal to the business side of the venture. I would say that Dungeons and Dragons as a game is a missed opportunity. We are making a game, we are playing a game, it is designed to be fun, but as a business, our job is to sell a product. Now, in the last few years, it seems there has been a push to monetize Dungeons and Dragons in the digital space. And this has had a varying degree of success. And I would say it has perhaps created a degree of not exactly goodwill with the players. Trying to create Dungeons and Dragons as a digital subscription, either through online resources to use whilst playing or through some sort of virtual tabletop, I think is taking Dungeons and Dragons away from what it is and what it should be. Dungeons and Dragons is at its heart a tabletop roleplay game, a game played by a group of friends sat around a table. And any effort to digitize this, to bring the game into the digital space, is taking it away from what it is at heart. Now, yes, a lot of people play Dungeons and Dragons online because distance separates groups. We had a pandemic and remote play was perhaps the only way people could play then. But really, we should be aiming to make this a game played by people face-to-face around a table. Look at Critical Role, a group of people playing around the table. Look at Stranger Things, featuring a group of kids playing Dungeons and Dragons in their basement. These are two of the things that made Dungeons and Dragons really popular in the last 10 years. And this is what the company should be aiming for and capitalizing on. So what we need to do is we need to find a way to offer products to players that they want to spend their money on to enhance their gaming experience. Our game should be an invitation into an ecosystem where they can, if they want to, spend their money on our products. As a dungeon master, there are a number of different products available to you, mostly in the form of books. As a player, less so. If you play Dungeons and Dragons, there is pretty much nothing that you need other than a pen or pencil, some paper, and a handful of dice. And sure, having the player handbook is useful. Perhaps having a couple of extra resource books with some extra rules in is nice. But for the players, there isn't really that much that they could spend their money on if they wanted to. Now, I've said this in other videos, the low barrier to entry is one of the things that make roleplay games a fantastic hobby. If you have a friend that has the books and can lend you some dice, you can turn up with the clothes that you're wearing and have a fantastic evening spending no money. And that makes this such an easy hobby to get into. But once you get into that hobby, once you enjoy it, what do you spend your money on then? People like spending money on their hobby, irrespective of what their hobby is. They like getting the accessories associated with their hobby that mark them as being a member of that community. You look at someone who really enjoys golf and they will be spending thousands of pounds, dollars, euros on golf clubs, golf course memberships, traveling to golf tournaments. They do not mind dropping money on their hobby. Someone who does swimming, they've got the trunks. What else? Oh, nice pair of goggles, swimming gloves, nose plugs, earplugs, swimming cap. Obviously not me. I just have to tie the beard back. People spend money on their hobbies. If you play Dungeons and Dragons and you have a set of dice and you have the player's handbook, what else is there for you to get? Models? Sure, you might buy a model for a campaign. If you're playing on virtual tabletop, you don't even do that. I think Wizards of the Coast is missing out on players being prepared to spend money on their hobby. And I think there should be gaming accessories that make the gameplay better, more fun, more enjoyable, but without being absolutely necessary. I think a well-designed set of rules can have enough little accessories or things to track or things to do that invite the players to buy additional products. Now, these additional products are not necessary. There are ways to track everything. There are ways to record everything. There are ways to remember anything that are free. And I would never want to write a game that said, in order to play this class, you have to buy this product. In order to use this ability, you have to buy this product. That's not the way I want the game to be. And I think every Dungeons and Dragons player would agree with me on that. But if you are playing a melee character and you have different weapon masteries or maneuvers that you can use, and you have them all written down on your character sheet, but there is a product that are like little poker chips with the different abilities on, and you can say, okay, I'm going to make a weapon attack and I'm going to use this ability and this ability, and you can put those chips on the table to say what they're doing. And perhaps using a variety of them give you some bonus, so there's a little tracker to show the ones that you've used that you can put those chips in. That's a nice mechanic. And it's also a way to make and sell a product as part of the game. A product that players do not need. Let's be very clear on this. They do not need to spend money on this. But they can spend money on it. And it's nice. And it makes the game more enjoyable. That is what Dungeons and Dragons has been letting itself down with. Let's remember that Hasbro is a toy and game company. It makes and sells physical products. And Dungeons and Dragons should be part of this ecosystem, because Wizards of the Coast is owned by Hasbro, and Wizards of the Coast should be making products that players want to buy, that they want to use in their game. If you start a new campaign, your Dungeon Master might buy a new source book or campaign book. The players will draw up a new character, brand new character. Are they getting any new things for it? No. What happens if there was a core pack for each class that had little cards that had your different abilities on? I actually made these for a character, and it was really useful. It just to have, these are my actions, these are my bonus actions, these are the resources and how many times I can use them, and this is when I get those resources back. So everything was color-coded based on when I got them back. If I got them back at the end of my turn, they were green. If I got them back on a short rest, they were yellow. If I got them back on a long rest, they were red. And so I could play these. I had a visual representation of how many times I could use each ability. I had a visual representation of when I got them back. And I had something in my hand that reminded me, hey, do you want to use the spell Hex? Or, hey, you've got that bonus action. You want to change the target for Hex. Or activate Blade Song. Or any one of another selection of bonus actions or actions. And these physical cards, they were a great prop, but they were a product that Wizards of the Coast could have sold me. Imagine a deck of cards like that with the core abilities for each class. Now imagine we take that one step further and that each player species has certain abilities tied to it. So you're building a new character, you've got all these new abilities, they're written on your character sheet, you don't need to buy these. But you go, hey, actually, you know what, I really would like the Bugbear and Rogue packs just to help me build this character. That's 2 extra things that you've sold a player when when they're starting a new campaign. So that would be my first pitch to Wizards of the Coast. I want to make a game where there is an opportunity to include accessories that would be nice for the players to have. Not vital, they can still play them without them, but it's an opportunity, it's an invitation for the players to buy into the ecosystem and to have physical player aids that make the game more fun. And you know what, even if I'm playing over Roll20, I would still want to have these cards in my hand to remind me what to do. So even over a virtual tabletop, I might still want to buy a physical product. So that's my first pitch. My second pitch is how I would make the next version of Dungeons and Dragons. I think that we need to make some significant changes and evolutions in the progression of Dungeons and Dragons. I really like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and I haven't moved over to the 2024 version because it's not different enough. I think the 2024 version of Dungeons & Dragons is perhaps a better game. I'll say it is a better game. I like the steps that have been taken. I don't think they went far enough, but I like the steps that were taken. But I'm already invested in the 2014 5th edition. I have the books. I have all the rules. And it's not a big enough change to make me want to step over. I think 5th edition is better than 4th edition, is better than 3rd edition, is better than 2nd edition, is better than the original. I think there is a clear progression there. I have played AD&D a long time ago. I kind of missed out on 3, 3.5 and 4. I'm aware of them. I have bit of knowledge of them in the background, but I really got back into D&D with the 5th edition. I spent a long time playing other games as well. The next version of Dungeons & Dragons should be a step forward. I don't think an iteration on 5 and 5.5 is enough. I think there have been a lot of innovations in tabletop role-playing games since the original Dungeons & Dragons came out 50 years ago. And I think we need to take a step forward. Now, with that in mind, there are things that are core to Dungeons & Dragons that should absolutely not be changed. Dungeons & Dragons is the world's greatest role-playing game for a number of reasons, and there are core gameplay mechanics baked into Dungeons & Dragons that I don't think should be changed, because it would change what Dungeons & Dragons is and represents too much. Dungeons & Dragons is a class-based system. I don't think that should change. I like the way multi-classing is handled to a degree, but at its core, it's still a class-based system. I wouldn't want to change that. Dungeons & Dragons is also a level-based system. I'm a level 5 mage. I have made videos in the past where I've talked about perhaps a different approach to leveling up. There are many roleplay games that don't have any form of level in them at all. I don't think that's the right fit for Dungeons & Dragons. Maybe we could open up the levels so that we're not earning everything in one chunk. That as a level 5 wizard, these are the improvements, abilities that I will get at this level, and I can earn them bit at a time in perhaps an order of my choice. And when they are all done, I am now a level 6 wizard. But a level-based system is still absolutely core to the DNA of what Dungeons & Dragons is. Dungeons & Dragons is a D20-based game. And any new version of Dungeons and Dragons should be a D20 based game. I think that is part of the absolute accepted core of what D&D is. I know the very first version of D&D wasn't necessarily D20 based, but we have enough heritage with D20 that we're not going to give that up. I love dice pool based games. They're my favourite type. But I would not change Dungeons & Dragons to be a dice pool based game. Dungeons & Dragons is a D20 game, and we stick with the D20. Was it bounded accuracy? I think that was the term used. That has some wiggle room with it, but I think it's the general right approach for this. Okay, what else? Dungeons & Dragons is an encounter-based game. There are clear pillars of gameplay in Dungeons & Dragons. There are combat encounters, there are social encounters, there are exploration encounters. Maybe adding pursuit would be an interesting way to add an extra pillar of gameplay. But as an encounter-based system, that's absolutely core to what D&D is. I wouldn't want to change that. Dungeons & Dragons uses hit points. It's a hit point based system. A lot of modern roleplay games move away from hit points. The Daggerheart system I think looks really interesting. I like that. And a lot of roleplay games that have hit points have other additional damage mechanics included. In at least one version of Battlelords of the 23rd century, you had your hit points, but any attack that did more than 25% of your total hit points also did critical damage. I don't think critical wounds and negative wound effects are part of Dungeons & Dragons' heroic fantasy. You have a pool of hit points, and when they're gone, you are out of action. I think that's core to what Dungeons & Dragons is. Dungeons & Dragons is an attritional roleplay game. That's something that I might want to change. I'll get into that later. But the idea of having resources and spending resources as you go through the day, that's part of what it is. They're making a choice of what resources I'm going to spend in combat is core to what Dungeons & Dragons is. And finally, Dungeons & Dragons is a game of slaying monsters and collecting loot. That is absolutely core to it. Now, the game has changed a lot in the last 50 years, and the social pillar of role-playing is far more important. But going into a dungeon or some other combat area, slaying monsters, collecting loot and magic items is a really important part of Dungeons & Dragons. I would not want to change that at all. What might I want to change? Well, to start with, I want to change some of the very core parts of what Dungeons & Dragons is. At the moment, I would describe Dungeons & Dragons as tactical, attritional fantasy. Tactical because you are making choices, you're moving around a map, you're using different abilities in different circumstances. There is a lot of thought put into Dungeons & Dragons encounters, whether it be exploration or combat. The social aspect of it is a lot less gameplay. Maybe that can change. But at its heart, Dungeons & Dragons is tactical, attritional fantasy. I would somewhat change that. I would change it to tactical, heroic, team-based fantasy. Now, both of those, tactical and fantasy, those not going to change. Dungeons & Dragons, at its heart, is a fantasy game, and it's a tactical role-playing game. Now, heroic role-play games focus less on attrition and focus more on abilities and using abilities. I think that the way people have played Dungeons & Dragons has changed significantly. I'm not going to say over the last 40 years, but definitely over the last 10, 15 years. If you look at the way that Dungeons & Dragons is played in many actual plays, in many tables, I've played in so many different roleplay groups, face-to-face and around the world online. People do not play Dungeons and Dragons like it was played 30 or 40 years ago. I remember dungeon crawling. Random hackage is a term that I've had. You're in a dungeon, there's some goblins, go and kill them, here's your loot, open the next door, new encounter, repeat. That was the game. There are other games that do that. Hero Quest and Warhammer Quest from Games Workshop are pure dungeon crawling tactical combat games that are purely attritional based. But that's not what people play Dungeons and Dragons for. Dungeons and Dragons is now a storytelling device that has a lot of combat in it, sure, but it's grand fantasy with personal narratives and ongoing stories. And this purely attritional roleplay mechanic isn't what people play. I have not been at a table that has 6+ encounters a day. People just don't play the game that way. And if the game is written and balanced for that, but people aren't playing it, then maybe we should change how the game works rather than trying to force people to play the game in a way that they don't want to. So I would make the game, rather than attritional fantasy, tactical fantasy, I'd make it heroic tactical fantasy. And heroic tactical fantasy means less about saving resources for that potential big encounter that's coming, into I can earn resources by doing certain things. So if I do this, this, and this, I unlock an even better ability. So I'm going to use my resources and abilities now, because it will unlock something even better later on. And if I do the right combo of things now, I'll get even more powerful. So that boss fight that might happen, when I come into it, I'm going to be even better. I think that encourages a more fun and a less conservative approach to gameplay. And I think that matches what people want. If you finish an encounter and you go, I've got hardly any hit points left, I've got hardly any spell slots left, I've used up all my class abilities, we should stop and have a rest. That is a very conservative approach to gameplay. On the other hand, if you finish an encounter and go, great, I've got this powered up, this is on max, throw something else at me, that's a more heroic way of doing fantasy. So if your players are playing the game right, they want another encounter rather than fear another encounter. I think that's what we want for Dungeons and Dragons. I also put team-based. I have thoughts on rewriting classes so that each class has a way of contributing to the team, a way of providing bonuses or opportunities to all the other players in the team. When you are building your team for Dungeons and Dragons, you should be able to point to every single class and go, I want this class in the party for these reasons. If at the moment you've got a group of 4 players and a new player is joining the group and they say, oh, I'm going to play a ranger. Sorry, Rangers, most people are going to go, oh man. We've got a spell blaster, we've got a fighter that can use a bow. What's a ranger going to do? On the other hand, if you rewrite ranger to give them certain abilities that benefit the entire squad, hey, when I put Hunter's Mark on something, everyone gets a buff attacking that target. With my abilities in the wild, I can make exploration so much more fun for the whole party. Because I'm used to surviving and being by myself, if there's a skill that no one has in the party, you know what, I'm okay at that. I know enough that we can get through. You do something like that for every single class. You give every single class a mechanic that contributes to the whole party, that makes the whole party better. Everyone's going to want every class in the party. There's not going to be a worse class. It's going to be hunting for the best synergies between players. I love theory crafting characters. I think D4 Deep Dive with Colby is one of the best channels for Dungeons and Dragons on YouTube. And that theory crafting where they build the character that can do the most damage in 1 turn or 4 turns or every turn, I think that's wonderful. But imagine, instead of trying to synergize abilities for a character, that you were trying to do it across a whole party. So you know what? The bard lets everyone do this. But if you've got a bard and a ranger, that everyone can do this as well. And this unlocks another ability that everyone can have. Wow, that's really cool. Imagine if that team-based gameplay was baked into the core rules for Dungeons and Dragons. That's what I would do. Now, as I mentioned before, the core gameplay of Dungeons and Dragons has evolved over time, moving it away from a dungeon crawling, attritional based combat into a more teamwork based, narrative and heroic game, I think would improve the game without losing the legacy of what makes Dungeons and Dragons Dungeons and Dragons. I love Dungeons and Dragons. I play it a lot. I would not want to see a game that was too different in character, in background, in gameplay appear. But I do think Dungeons and Dragons could be better. I think every edition has been a positive improvement, and I applaud the work that previous generations of game developers have done with Dungeons and Dragons. But I think the next step perhaps should be a slightly bigger step and be perhaps in a slightly different direction, to make a game that is popular, beloved by many, played around the world, and played in a way that matches the rules. If you can make a game and people play the game in the same way that the rule mechanics are supporting, the game and the players work better together. And there isn't this constant tension about the rules say you should do this, but our story says we should do that. If the rules and the story and the players all want to do the same thing, you have a better game. So that's what I would do if I was the head of gameplay design for Dungeons and Dragons. Now, do I want to go and live in Washington State? Probably not. For the salary they're offering, I might. You know what? I might. I don't think I can telecommute from Helsinki to Seattle. I think the time difference is too big. But you know what? I could buy a little flat there. I could live there and send most of my money back to keep the wife and kids alive. So you know what? Maybe I should apply for it. I've got some ideas. This is what I'd do. So tell me, what do you think? What do you think should be the priorities for the next head of game design for Dungeons and Dragons? And the ideas that I've had, would you play that game? Should they give me that job? I'd like to think that of my 100 and something subscribers, probably all the heads of games design at Wizards of the Coast and all the senior business people at WotC and Hasbro, they're definitely among my subscribers. They're going to watch this video and they're going to see, oh, this Thomas guy from Dungeon Academics, he's got some great ideas. Maybe I should give him the job. You know what? Send me an email, drop me a message. I'll put an application in. And even if you don't give me the job, maybe you'll like some of the ideas. Because I would like to shape the future of Dungeons and Dragons. I'd love to shape the future of this game that I play and that started it all. Anyway, I have some Dungeons and Dragons this evening. I'm really looking forward to that. and I hope you enjoy your next game, whatever it may be.